Hi! Well, you've got to be asking yourself, what's this all about? So, this is my story. Ever since I was little, I always wanted to learn Japanese. Okay, well, maybe not that little. So like a lot of people, I grew up playing a lot of video games, and a lot of those games were from Japan. Ever since then, I promised myself that one day I would learn the language. But then, life happened. I graduated high school, got a full-time job, and 12 years later, it still hadn't happened. Until one day, I decided to just do it. I had the best friends/teachers you could hope for, who were supportive and taught me so much about the language and the culture. But because of my responsibilities, I couldn't take a class, and I certainly couldn't travel there, so all I had was my apps, my computer programs, and a couple of grammar books. My favorite way to study Japanese was to watch Japanese dramas, but I never knew what to watch, what was good, what wasn't good, and what was worth my very limited time. So, I would look online, and they would have lists upon lists, but it never really told you what was good or not, which made things very difficult for me. That's what I'm here for, to tell you what's good, what's not, what you can learn the most from, and even give you some cultural perspective from an outsider. So welcome to JD's Drama Corner. Minasan konnichiwa, I'm JD, and this is my debut video. Now, the reason why I'm making this video is to ask a question. Am I the only one? I've been learning the language for 4 years now, and I've never been able to find anybody who does what I do on YouTube. Now, there are millions of content creators who do amazing things, people who are native to Japan, or people who've just moved there and become fluent in the language, all trying to help people out, or at least point them in the right direction. But there weren't any geared towards people like me, people who use various ways to learn the language to sort of freeform it, using media like TV shows, dramas, and music as a big part. Now, a lot of people say that using media is a great way to learn the language, but they never show you how, what to use, or how to get the most out of it. That's why I'm here. I'm just a regular guy, not taking any classes, just armed with my phone, my grammar books, and the internet. Here to help you find out what you can learn, and most importantly, why it's good and what's not. There's a lot of really great Japanese media out there, and it has taught me so much about the culture, or at least how the Japanese see their culture. As an outsider, it's made it a little bit easier for me to understand them, somewhat. Sure, it's fictional, but if you were to watch an American TV show from any particular time period, you would see what's important to those people of that time, even though it's fictional. And with that, I have to give you my very first warning. Do not ever, and I mean ever, use any particular form of media as the only way to learn this language. And definitely do not try to use the language the exact same way that you see it used in music, manga, anime, even most dramas and TV shows. It is super dramatized, and if you try to use it the same way, odds are you'll come across looking like a cartoon character instead of a serious student of the language. So with that said, come on with me and I will show you what I found that makes Japanese media so great, and even some cultural differences from an outsider's perspective. So today's video will be on the very first Japanese drama that I'd ever seen, and that's Future Diary. Based on the manga, first written and illustrated by Sakae Asuna, which ran from 2006 to 2010. Right off the bat, the very first episode had me hooked. Now, I'd watched thousands of TV shows and movies over the course of my life, so I had a very cynical kind of attitude. Very much of a been there, seen that kind of thing. Not much really surprises me. But the structure of this very first episode drew me right in. See, this show doesn't build tension with jump cuts or withholding information. It tells you exactly what the stakes are. Now, don't be fooled with the playful, light tone that's established early on. This show is dark. Real dark. I mean, late night cable TV in America dark. But you see, Future Diary doesn't do that by being dark or broody like some other shows are. Quite the opposite, actually. It shows you exactly what it's going to do first. Then, it just leaves you guessing on how we're going to get back to that point, as can be seen here in this opening scene. Now the show revolves around Arata Hoshino, played by Masaki Okada. Arata is a very unique college student whom, through a very different set of circumstances, gets his hands on a very rare phone. A Cronus smartphone, one of a very rare series of phones that's a lot more than just a status symbol to rub in the faces of the other students. The Cronus comes preloaded with an app that tells him of future events called the Future Diary, which shows him not only his immediate future, but that of those around him as well. Unsure of whether he's being pranked or not, he soon becomes convinced when the next morning the diary gives him an answer key to a quiz he didn't even know he had coming. Not the worst way in the world for a college student to wake up. But then things start to get really interesting when Yuno Furusaki comes into the picture, played by Ayami Goriki. Now, Yuno is very much unlike any other character in the show up to this point. When we first meet Yuno, it's not really clear whether or not she's an actual character or just a figment of Arata's conscience, since she shows up when he's using the Future Diary to help him with an exam. Then, she shows herself to know much more about him than it appears she should. But she is not shy about telling Arata exactly how she feels about him. When other shows have characters like this, normally they're dark and broody. Not Yuno. She tells you straight up who she is, what she's all about, and what she knows, with a great big smile on her face. We just don't exactly know what that means. At least not yet. Later on that night, of course, Arata does what any of us would do with a device that tells the future. Play the lottery, run some slots, and of course, party with his friends. Which got me thinking. The device tells him these random things about the future, but why? Is he trying to gain his trust? Is he just randomly showing him things just for the heck of it? Is he asking? Maybe the answers are in the manga, but it's not really clear in this episode. But it's things like that that kept me engaged in the show. I wanted to know what the story was with this phone. Later on that night, things take a really sharp turn when Arata is coming home. He sees his father leaving, presumably to work, even though it is a late hour. Then, as he goes inside, the diary tells him he wasn't just going to work. He's gone, and he's not coming back. So after confirming with his mother, of course, he's in shock. And who comes to the rescue but Yuno? How did she know where he lived? How did she know he was hurting? Yuno is very mysterious, despite being the least guarded character on the entire show. That made her really interesting to me. Made me kind of want to find out what her story was and what she was all about. Now this leads to a very awkward meeting as she attempts to console him. After this encounter, you get the feeling that while Yuno's heart is in the right place, she is really freaking Arata out. Make matters worse, Arata gets a notification saying that he's about to die. Then the intensity picks up even more. The show hits us with a little bit of a fake out and makes us think that Arata's getting killed, when in reality it's somebody who just so happens to have a Cronus smartphone and look like him that gets the ice pick to the neck. Pretty sneaky, Future Diary. It's at this point when we meet up with the police and find out that the murder we just saw is actually connected to a string of murders with many people who also just so happen to have Cronus smartphones, because of course they do. Then we finally meet up with the head detective of this case, Kinjiro Hajinoto, played by Yoshinoro Okada. We catch up with him when he's visiting a very mysterious woman confined to a hospital room. We don't really hear much from her at this point. Hopefully later on she'll give us some insight. After that notification causes him to freak out and hide under the covers to wait it out, which is probably the smartest thing to do, probably what I would do in that situation. But it doesn't last very long, as he then gets a phone call letting him know that his friend Rui is being hunted down by the police. Rui is the guy who gave him the Cronus in the first place. Then, right after that, he gets another notification on his future diary, telling him exactly when and where he will meet up with Rui. Then it becomes a race against time, where he wants to go, rescue his friend, get some answers, and hopefully find someplace safe before his time runs out. After being chased, he finally gets cornered, and then he has his final confrontation with the killer, or so it would seem, until he's saved by none other than Yuno. Then, with Arata in tow, they both try to escape, until Yuno later on gets knocked out, and then, just when it looks like Arata's fate is sealed, then his father jumps in the way to take the death blow. It's at this point when we discover that he had a Chronos phone of his very own. It is now we get to understand that just because the phone says you're going to die doesn't mean you can't be saved, as Arata's father sacrificed himself to take his place so that his son could live.
未来変わったね.
Then we see Arata slam down his father's phone in a fit of rage, confusion, and grief. But then something interesting happens. As it cracks, something appears to be happening to his father. Then all of a sudden, his body starts glowing and then just explodes into a flurry of digital blocks and seeming ones and just all kinds of madness. At that point, Arata sees his friend Rui running up the stairs, so they give chase and follow him into the planetarium. It is at this point when he explains that the whole reason that he gave them the phones in the first place is because his sister was being held blackmail, and having finished his mission, he was just retrieving her to make sure she was safe. It's at this point when we finally meet Deus. He explains to them that they are unwillingly part of a game where there can be only one survivor. The prize will be a future that they can command at will. Which begs the question, between Future Diary and Battle Royale, was the Hunger Games just a mashup of Japanese ideas? Anyways, so what happens next? Who is Deus? What if they refuse to eliminate each other? How is anybody going to get through Yuno to get to Arata? What if they're the last two left? What happens then? This episode definitely made me want to find out what happened next in the story, more about Yuno, more about the world. Overall, I give this episode an 8 out of 10. Now it's time for a cultural perspective. From a cultural perspective, the one thing that really jumped out at me was Arata's dad. Not the sacrificing himself for his son thing, more the it being late night and Arata coming back and his father just seemingly leaving for work. Seems that this is a huge part of Japanese culture. People work late. I mean really late. Here in American culture, if you're home later than 5, that's a late day. But in Japan, there are people who are at work at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, even later. Sometimes people just sleep at the office because they're there so late. It's just a completely different culture as far as work ethic is concerned. With Japanese people, they feel guilty sometimes for being the first one to leave, so they won't. And then everybody just ends up staying. So the work schedule is not quite the 9 to 5 Monday through Friday thing that we as Americans are used to. And that was the first big cultural difference that I noticed just from the very first episode. And now for a learner's perspective. In this episode, they speak in a lot of short, basic sentences, which makes it easier for a beginning learner to pick up on. Also makes it easier for you to follow along and train your ear to getting used to hearing the language at full speed. Now, the phrase that I picked out is one that was repeated over and over again in the episode. Also, it has fairly simple grammar. So the phrase that I picked out was, "Anata no mirai wa watashi no mono da yo." So that's all I have for episode 1 of Future Diary. If you'd like more content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe and to ring that bell. Leave any questions, comments, or suggestions for dramas you would like me to review in the future down below. I have a lot of dramas that I want to get to, but I'd love to see what you guys would like me to do as well. Thank you very much for joining me here in the Drama Corner. I'll see you next time. Mata ne.